Welcome to 78.4, the podcast that helps you leave a godly legacy for future generations by showing you the incredible things God has done in the lives of men and women around the world. If he can do those things in these people's lives, imagine what he can do in yours. I'm Bob.
And I'm Matt. Thanks for hanging out with us again. Today, we're going to talk about going through transitions. Transitions. What's the best way, as a Christian, to deal with the one thing in life that is constant? Change. Transitions can be exciting for sure, but they also can be paralyzing, and they can be scary. Whether it's starting a new job, getting married, having children, moving to a new place, being human is a constant transitioning from one part of your life to another. So it makes sense that it can be kind of scary. So Bob, what's one transition that seems to be the most stressful to you?
Oh man, I've gone through everything you've mentioned. I've gone through,
Yes.
And they were all stressful.
Oh yeah.
But I guess for me, one of the big ones is traveling. And you think about it, traveling is a transition. You're starting off at point A, and you transition to point B,
Right.
or sometimes point A to point B to point C. And I love being at point A. Mm-hmm. I love being at point B. Mm-hmm. I hate the journey to get there. And sometimes that's missed flights or,
Right.
late connections, running through airports. It's that journey that you got to go through that is always so difficult.
Right. Transitions are scary. And my best personal example of the thrill and gripping fear of transition was, you're going to like this one, Bob.
I'm sure.
It's when my wife and I became parents for the first time.
Oh, yeah. That's a biggie.
There's tons of excitement and fear there, especially when we first brought him home from the hospital. Mm-hmm. See, Bob, at the hospital, the kid was safe. There are experts there that can take care of the kid. If something we're doing wrong or learning in that new transition and we don't know what we're doing, we can just ask the nurse. The nurse helps. But then when you bring the kid home, it's now completely up to us.
You're on your own.
To keep the boy alive. And we felt that fear instantly the first night when we tried to feed him. Now, he wasn't latching well when he was trying to breastfeed in the hospital. So, sure enough, the first night he came home, he wasn't latching well there either. So, my wife and I proceed to go into total freak-out mode and decide that if that child does not eat tonight, he's going to die.
Oh, gee.
Even though it doesn't make any sense. We're sure. It's 1 a.m. And she decides that he will never eat. So now at 1 a.m. is the time to try to start to learn how to use a breast pump to save the kid. So she pulls out this contraption that we have never seen before. We open up the box. It looks like some sort of medieval torture device. She attaches it to herself, and crying the whole time out of pure stress, she starts pumping. This is a sight that no man especially ever needs to see. So finally, she gets enough to fill a bottle, which takes like a while to do this. And she hands it to me, exhausted. And Bob, she says, it's now my job to save our child from starvation. She's going to go to bed. So I grab the bottle. She heads to bed. And I sit with my new child. He's beautiful. Mm-hmm. I put the little bottle into his mouth.
Yep.
And he's sucking away. But I decide, look, I don't think enough milk's coming out of this thing. I don't even see much milk moving.
No.
And so I think I must save the child. I must help this kid. And so I do the only reasonable thing that one can do at 2 or 3 in the morning.
Oh.
And I proceed to poke a very large hole into the bottle nipple and with a scissors. This is a sizable hole because I'm gonna save my child. So of course, when I put it in his mouth, the milk gushes. Now there's gushing. His face is drowning. As far as I can see, I'm drowning my son in baby milk overflowing out of his mouth. And my first thought was, I am now wasting the milk that my wife spent an hour with that godforsaken barbaric device.
You're a dead man.
Yes. But also I'm thinking, I am a terrible parent. I'm going to be the worst dad. This was my first night. And that's how transitions can be, full of confusion, mixed with fear and excitement all at once. So how we properly go through those transitions is obviously pretty important to how we thrive in life. How do we get past the fear and get to the acceptance of change and the excitement part of it? So today, we'll hear from 3 people who have gone through major life transitions and find out how God helped them get through it to the other side.
Our first friend today is Lorna Johnson. She knows a thing or two about transitions.
Transitions in life, or some people may call them curveballs from God. You're either moving into a transition or out of one. They're going to come. That's just reality. And so I remembered after our third daughter, we literally gave birth. I gave birth and we moved from Detroit to Minneapolis. Threw my world upside down. A wife, a mother, a new state, a ministry of 250. I didn't know where anything was. Women, wives, you understand what it means that you got to get doctors, you got to find the schools, and not being connected to the team because of trying to adapt and help the children to adjust, get your home settled, learn just the city and your surroundings. All of a sudden, I could barely function, it seemed like. I felt like I was numb. I didn't realize that I was numb, but someone shared with me that I was experiencing like 5 major changes, curves, transitions, and that no wonder there was a numbness. I was just in survival mode. And I remember that Dirk looked at me and he just said, "Have you prayed about it?" And I thought, he had to throw that in. Did you pray about it? And so obviously I hadn't. And it took really saying, "Lord, I need for you to intervene." Learning that my identity was not in discipling women and on the campus, that my identity was not being the right type of mother, that my identity was not anything unless it was recognizing my identity in the person of Jesus Christ. I'm an artist, and one of the things I did not like is when my husband or other people in the midst of me beginning to draw something, "What's that? That doesn't look like that." And I'm saying, I'm in the process. I could see it in my head, but of course someone outside could not see what was in my mind. And the Lord was showing me that, "Lorna, just as you draw, that you are my workmanship. You are my masterpiece. From the time that you have come to know me, I am creating a masterpiece, putting together for my purposes and for my will." That was helpful because it began to help me to understand these curves and these transitions in life were God's way of refining. And I thought, in all this faithfulness, whether it was moving into marriage, moving into having children, walking and raising these little sinners to be disciples for Christ in the future, and I still kept my hand in the ministry. These girls that were coming to know the Lord, they desired to be a mother. They desired to be a wife. I was realizing how God was giving me a chance to disciple them more than just the Word of God, more than just how to transfer the gospel to another, but how to live life, the life of Christ. And so I just encourage you that in the light of these transitions or curveballs that come blindly a lot of times into our life, that we would not fear, because God desires to continue that perfection process so that we can reflect more of the glory of Him. And just like my husband or my kids could not see the end result of the picture that I would be drawing, God sees the end picture for you. And so I encourage you, look to Him when you don't know where you're going, because He is the light and knows where He wants to take you.
I love how she explains transitions, especially surprise transitions, as a curveball from God. I'm a big baseball fan.
Same here.
Some of you out there might not be. So a curveball is a pitch that is thrown that looks straight, It looks like it's easy to hit, it's coming straight at you, but then by some witchcraft trickery, the ball suddenly turns left or right or drops, and you can't possibly know which way until it's on you, and it's too late to adjust.
Mm-hmm.
And man, that's exactly how an unsolicited transition in life feels, like a 100 mile per hour bullet coming at you, and you can't tell where it's going to end up. And yet, here's the cool cheat code to a curve that Lorna mentioned. God knew. The curveball didn't surprise God one bit. He saw it coming all along. He might have been the one who pitched it, Bob.
Yep.
And when you know a curve is coming, they can actually be easier to hit, easier to knock right out of the park. So trusting that God has something that he wants to do with the curve is the key.
Curveballs are God's way of refining us. I've read that in Bible times, the way gold was refined was that the refiner would melt the ore in a crucible with flames hotter than 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit.
That is hot.
Almost as hot as Florida.
In the summer, yeah.
And as the slag rose to the surface, the slag is the impurities. When that slag rose to the surface, the refiner would skim it off, and he'd keep doing it until all of it was gone. And he knew the gold was ready when he could clearly see his own reflection in it. And that's what God does with us.
I like that. Transitions are God chiseling our comfort zones into a better reflection of him in us. And no one knows that better than our next guest, Carolyn. So listen to her unique perspective and what she sees transitions actually are in life.
We want to make God predictable. We want to get him on our own terms. We want to have strategies and keys and techniques for being able to get God under control and in our life. And that's not how he works. One of my favorite quotes is, God comes to us disguised as our life. And everything in life changed for me at that moment when the doctor called. She said, my husband had a brain tumor and we need you to go to this particular hospital. And I said, okay, well, when, what day? And she said, now, go now. So Terry had surgery to remove a brain tumor that was benign. He couldn't stand up by himself. He had no balance. He had quadruple vision. He couldn't swallow or talk. And people have often asked me, do you question God? Did you question God? Why do you think God let this very effective missionary, Terry, why did he let him have a brain tumor and have to come out of ministry? But I felt as though I was immersed enough in the story of what God is doing in the world that I knew what God was up to. It's what he's always up to. He is bringing the kingdom to life in our messed up world and in us. So I didn't really ask that question. The hardest moment for me was really when we moved back to the States, because I felt like that scene in Out of Africa when she says, this is not what I thought would happen to me now. That my life as an exciting missionary behind the Iron Curtain, that would change. That was the life I expected. So that was the hardest moment for me. I felt like I said goodbye to my life as I knew it. Friends, our home, our ministry in Eastern Europe, and we moved back to the States. I remember getting off the plane in Seattle with 11 big bags, 3 kids, Terry, who could not stand up by himself. He could walk as long as someone was holding him up, but he had no balance. If you let go of him, he'd just fall down. He's 6'5". Got off the plane, and there was nobody at the gate to meet us. So I went in the ladies' room, and I looked at myself in the mirror, and I said, you can do this. And I went out and I did it. We saw God take care of us. There were moments when I just almost physically felt the sense of God's upholding peace as I took care of Terry and the kids. He takes every interruption, every unexpected thing that comes into our life, and all those years of the things that we'd experienced, that God had been in a way packing my suitcase with things that I would need in the future, that he knew I would need, that I didn't know I would need. And then he began to use all that. God opened doors in ways that I never imagined. I found that there was a place for me that he gives us a path to walk. He doesn't give us a map. And as I walk that path with Jesus, that path is what takes me to where I want to be. I never know where it's going, but I know that it's with Jesus on this path, that I'm following him. So anytime anyone says, this is the new key to the Christian life, I think, yeah, well, God changes the lock whenever you think you've got the key. The key is Jesus himself, who is everything that we need. Be content to be the object of his mercy and depend on nothing else. I can do that. It doesn't really take much to be an object of mercy. And that's what I want to be. That's what I can be.
God's interruptions. The first thing that came to mind when I just heard her story was what's going on right now. Like the entire world, all of us are starting to kind of transition still out of the COVID pandemic. I mean, first 2020 was the ultimate interruption.
Right.
The sudden isolation and fear that then turned into years of isolation and fear and seclusion from each other, where we'd hear a cough and then you'd like duck for cover. Remember that? Remember those good old days, everyone? But now coming out of it, this transitioning hopefully back into a life before COVID as best we can, I think that's been hard too. Like we're all traumatized. I think we're traumatized more than we even know. And since everyone handles trauma and transition differently, we're all, and that means millions and millions of individual people are all in a different part of the spectrum of that transition, whether it's going back to work or just face-to-face socializing again has been difficult for many. The re-entering the world as humans outside of Zoom on a mass transition scale has been at times kind of crazy to witness.
I have a friend who still won't go back into a movie theater.
Right. That everyone's at a different spot. There's still people masking, there's still not, and you have to be graceful to each person in their transition because they're at a different spot. And that's been really hard to navigate, at least for me. But the good news is we're all together in that journey. We all have to learn how to move on to whatever journey in life that God puts us on. And as Carolyn said, every change we go through is God bringing his kingdom to life in our messed up world.
Yeah, I really like that. The biggest thing with transitions is they're easier to take when you trust the one who is carrying you through them.
Right.
Our last friend that we're going to hear from today is Chuck Price. Now, Chuck is going to talk about not a transition that he went through, but what he learned from someone who is going through a major transition.
Millions have come to Christ around the world because of the ministry of Campus Crusade for Christ. And after nearly 50 years of leading this ministry, it came time for Dr. Bright to pass the torch. In the technical terms, I guess, in organizational theory, they call it succession planning. We were so busy changing the world, we never thought much about succession planning. And so when he decided to step down, he actually caught all of the senior leadership folks around Dr. Bright at that time by surprise. And I got the assignment to go meet with Dr. Bright and find out what he was saying to clarify that. So we often joke that, well, I'll tie a rope around my ankle like the priest when they went into the Holy Holies, just in case I got slayed when I went in to ask him they could pull me back out. But we needed to talk to Dr. Bright about how hard it is for a founder to let go of the organization. That makes sense, right? And so that was my assignment that given day that our brilliant team came up with was that I was going to go in and talk with Dr. Bright about letting go of Campus Crusade. And I'll never, it just is so vivid to me. And I'll never forget it. I'm in the room with him and I'm saying to him, I say, well, hey, Dr. B, and I called him Dr. B a lot. And I said, Dr. B, it's really going to be hard to let this organization go, isn't it? Without a beat. He said, no, it's not. And I'm saying, well, Dr. B, you've led this thing for almost 50 years. Your thumbprint is all over the movement. And again, he said, no, it's not. And then I knew I was going to get tutored because he said, whenever he would say this, and he said this to me several times, but this particular time, my dear, dear Chuck, you just don't get it. And I said, what's that, Dr. Bright? What don't I get? And he said, this isn't a Bill Bright organization. I settled that issue 50 years ago when I signed my life over to Jesus Christ. He personally began to school on me what it means to be a slave of Jesus Christ. He talked about Galatians 2:20, that I am crucified with Christ and it's no longer I who live. And he talked about all the experiences that he had had in leading the movement, where he went back to that original contract where he had signed his life over to Jesus Christ, and it was no longer his life, and this organization was never his organization. It belonged to God. It was one of those holy moments with him. And I saw him live that out over the next number of months as we worked through the transition together. And to see the real person, and to see that what you saw on stage was what he was in person, and when no one else was looking and no one else was around. And at the end of the day, there was an acknowledgement that God was in control. As men and women of God, they were going to trust God with this together. And that is the difference the Spirit-filled life makes. When people truly understand the Lordship of Christ and what that means to be surrendered to Him and to be filled with the Spirit, the things that you go through look entirely different. How you handle it, the behaviors that you choose is very, very different. Because if you submit, God will bless you more than you could ever imagine.
Transitions aren't easy, especially when you're not ready for them. Lorna knew the plans that she and Dirk made, but living those out was overwhelming. Carolyn's transitions came out of left field. She had no way to prepare for them. And Dr. Bright, well, the transition he was making could have been devastating. How many of us wrap our identities around our careers?
Yeah.
And this was more than a career. He founded the organization and was its president for 50 years. And this wasn't just him transitioning out of his job. He was also dying at the same time. He's facing 2 major transitions.
Right.
But Chuck hit it on the head when he said that's the difference the Spirit-filled life makes. When people truly understand the Lordship of Christ and what that means to be surrendered to Him and to be filled with the Spirit, the things that you go through look entirely different. How you handle it, the behaviors that you choose, it's very, very different. Carolyn had a great illustration when she talked about God over the years packing her suitcase for the day that she would need it.
Right.
The key is trusting God to the point of surrendering to Him because, as she said, He gives us a path to walk. He doesn't give us a map. If you submit, God will bless you more than you could ever imagine.
Right. The last episode of our podcast was a great insight on how we can best deal with grief, with loss. And really, I was thinking transitions are similar in that every new challenge or chapter means the loss of something in the last chapter. That's what you're transitioning from, something to something else. And that's hard. Transition means losing comfort, which I love personally, and losing something I had gotten attached to or used to before. But the question is, do I accept and trust God in the change? Or do I allow that change to wrap me up in a cocoon where all I think about is what I had before and fear what might happen in the future? Do I really believe that God is all I need and can trust Him? The one who made everything that you are and everything that I am and everything around us. Can we trust that God and that He is refining us for the better? That He has something greater than mere comfortability for us on the other side? And when I know that, that's how we can defeat the fear part of change. Fear is always defeated by faith, by trust. You can't fear something if you know God has you.
Yeah, exactly.
So do you know that? Because it's true. Now that's something I got to preach to myself over and over, Bob.
Yep. Same
So
here.
it's in no way easy, but it's definitely the best way I can see God saying we should live in a world of constant change.
When we trust Christ, when our lives are surrendered to Him, there is a joy in the journey. One of the things with flying is you hit turbulence.
Right.
And if you've never hit turbulence before, you think the plane is going to fall apart. But there's a guy sitting in that cockpit up front who deals with that every day. And sometimes we're like, oh my goodness, But no, he's got it. It's like, it's cool. I've got it. And when we trust him, you can sit back and go, yeah,
A little turbulence.
Nothing big.
It's still bringing me to that awesome place that he's got.
Exactly. I've got point B to be at, and he's taking me there.
Right. So that ends our episode on facing transitions in life. We hope you got something you can apply to your own life through it.
Our hope with 78.4 is that it'll help you flourish in your relationship with Jesus. That's why we include the links to articles and tools in our show notes as a way of helping you grow in Him and build toward your own legacy. And especially in this one, we're going to have a link to living the Spirit-filled life so you can really know how to enjoy the journey here. So please, check out our show notes. Also, email us. We'd love to get to know you and the transitions you're going through.
Right. And the audio you heard today comes from some of the more than 600 and growing videos on our website, legacy.cru.org. That's legacy.cru.org. We also have a YouTube channel, Cru Legacy, and a Facebook page. Please check it out. And if you like today's podcast, we ask that you please subscribe so you can get the next one and the next one and then transition into the next one.
Oh, you got me there.
Yeah. Also, please rate us. It helps others hear about our podcast.
78.4 is a podcast of Legacy, a project of Cru.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week. And as always, while we're away, we want to encourage you to remember that whatever God did in the lives of the people you heard speak today, He can do in you. So until we're together again, go out there and continue the legacy.